My husband left me for a younger woman and took our entire family to his wedding overseas. He texted me, "Be gone when we return." I hate old things. I work hard, so I deserve a new life. When they came back, laughing and happy, they found nothing but empty land where our home used to stand. Their faces went pale. I watched from my parked car and couldn't stop smiling. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me tell you how I got to this delicious moment. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my Honda Civic watching my cheating ex-husband, Frank, and his child bride, Amber, stare in disbelief at a perfectly manicured empty lot where our $800,000 suburban paradise once stood. Oh, the look on Frank's face priceless. You'd think someone had just told him his precious golf membership had been revoked 6 months ago. I was Patricia Williams' faithful wife of 28 years, mother of 2 ungrateful adult children, and apparently, according to my husband, a nagging old bat who'd lost her figure and her purpose. Those were his exact words when he announced he was leaving me for Amber, his dental hygienist. Because nothing screams midlife crisis like a 24-year-old with perfect teeth and daddy issues. Naturally, the whole family supported him. Our son Jake, 28, still living off his trust fund, called it Dad's second chance at happiness. Our daughter Sophie, 26, a social media influencer, which basically means she takes selfies for a living, actually helped plan the destination wedding in Tuscany. "Mom, you have to understand," she said, painting her nails while offering her deep wisdom. "Dad's been unhappy for years. Amber makes him feel young again. I wasn't invited to the wedding, obviously. Frank made that crystal clear when he moved out. Patricia, I need you gone when we get back. Start fresh somewhere. Maybe Florida, where old people go." He actually laughed at his own joke while loading his golf clubs into Amber's pink Jeep. I hate old things. I work hard, so I deserve a new life. But here's what Frank didn't know about his old wife. I'd been planning for this day since the moment I found Amber's thong in his gym bag 3 years ago. Frank thought he was clever, but I'd been managing our finances for decades. Every investment, every account, every asset that man thought he owned. Let's just say he was about to learn the difference between having your name on something and actually owning it. The look on their faces when they pulled into the driveway and saw nothing but fresh sod and a for sale sign. It was worth every penny I'd spent on the demolition crew. But that was just the beginning. Frank's voice carried across the empty lot like a wounded animal. "Patricia," he screamed, spinning in circles where our front porch used to be. "What did you do to my house?" I rolled down my window just enough to hear him clearly. This was better than any soap opera I'd ever watched. Amber clutched his arm, wobbling on her designer heels. Apparently stilettos and grass don't mix. Who knew? Her bleached hair whipped around her face in the breeze and she looked seconds away from crying. Poor little thing probably thought she was moving into a mansion. "Frank, honey, where's our house?" she whined, her voice that special kind of pitchy that could shatter glass. "You said we had a beautiful house with a 3-car garage and a pool." "We did have a house," Frank barked, his face turning red, that vein on his forehead bulging, the same one that popped whenever he couldn't find the TV remote. "Patricia, I know you're here somewhere. This is my property." "Actually, sweetheart, it wasn't." But I wasn't about to ruin this beautiful breakdown by explaining property law. I'd learned so much about legal loopholes these past 6 months. Amazing what you can accomplish when you have time, money, and a burning desire for justice. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from my divorce attorney, Margaret Chen. "Demolition complete. He can't touch you legally. Enjoy the show." Margaret was 68, sharp as a razor, and had been handling messy divorces for 40 years. When I told her my plan, she smiled like a shark spotting blood in the water. Frank was now frantically dialing someone, probably his lawyer. The poor man who thought this was going to be a simple asset split. I'd met him once, a nervous little guy who kept wiping his glasses and saying, "This is highly unusual," every 5 minutes during our meetings. "What do you mean the house was legally sold?" Frank's voice cracked. "I lived there. My name was on the deed." "Check again." I almost felt sorry for him, almost. Then I remembered the night he came home reeking of Amber's vanilla perfume and told me I should consider updating my look because maintenance matters in a marriage. This from a man who hadn't seen the inside of a gym since Clinton was president. Giving me beauty advice. Amber had started crying, now actual tears, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "Frank, I quit my job. I gave up my apartment. You promised me we'd have a beautiful home together." "We will, baby. This is just a misunderstanding." Frank was sweating through his Tommy Bahama shirt, the one I'd bought him for Christmas 3 years ago. "Patricia's just being vindictive. We'll fix this." That's when Jake's BMW pulled up. My heart did a little skip. wondering if maybe just maybe one of my children would finally show some concern for their mother. But no. Jake jumped out of the car, looking panicked, not about me, but about the missing house where he'd planned to crash between jobs. Dad, what the hell happened to the house? Your psycho mother happened, Frank spat, and that right there was his second mistake. The first was cheating. The second was calling me psycho in front of witnesses. Because I'd been recording this entire beautiful meltdown on my phone. And my lawyer was going to love this footage. Dad, you can't be serious. Jake was staring at the empty lot like it might magically sprout a house if he just concentrated hard enough. Where are we supposed to live? We'll figure it out, son. Frank was trying to sound calm, but his voice had that high-pitched edge it always got when he was about to panic. This is just temporary. Your mother's playing games, but I'll straighten this out legally. Then Sophie's car pulled up, her Instagram-famous pink Mustang looking ridiculously out of place against the suburban emptiness. She climbed out slowly, phone already recording, because heaven forbid she experience a family crisis without documenting it for her followers. Oh my God, Sophie's voice was breathless. Dad, this is, like, totally insane. My childhood home is just gone. She was definitely recording this for TikTok. Probably already thinking up captions like family drama is wild or when your stepmom ruins everything. Actually, sweetheart, your stepmom had nothing to do with this. This was all your dear old mom, the one you haven't called in 3 months. Patricia did this. Frank announced to Sophie like he was delivering breaking news. She sold our house out from under us while we were at the wedding. Wait, she can do that? Amber's voice cracked. I thought you said everything would be fine. You said we'd work out the divorce stuff later. Oh, this was getting interesting. Frank had told his new wife they'd work out the divorce stuff later. That meant they hadn't actually gotten married overseas, which would make Amber a woman who'd quit her job and given up her apartment to move in with a man who was still legally married. Poor planning. Really, of course she can't do that, Frank said, lying through his teeth, and everyone knew it. I'm calling my lawyer right now. This is theft. This is fraud. This is legal, I said, rolling down my window all the way and stepping out of my car. They all turned to stare at me like I'd just appeared out of thin air. Frank's mouth actually dropped open. Amber took a step back. Jake looked confused, which wasn't unusual for Jake. And Sophie immediately swung her phone camera toward me. Hello, family, I said pleasantly, smoothing down my new haircut. I'd gone shorter and blonder, and judging by Frank's expression, it looked good on me. How was Italy? Patricia, what have you done? Frank's voice was strangled. I sold my house, I said, keeping my tone light, like we were discussing the weather. Demolished it, actually. The new owners wanted to start fresh with the lot. Can't say I blamed them. The previous owner had terrible taste in furniture. Your house? Frank's face was turning purple now. That was our house. We bought it together. Actually, Frank, we didn't. I pulled a folder from my purse, the same purse he'd called matronly last Christmas. See, when you started your affair 3 years ago, I got curious about our finances. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that the house was purchased entirely with inheritance money from my parents. My name was the only one on the original deed. The silence stretched out between us like a rubber band about to snap. That's impossible. Frank whispered, your name was added later as a gift, when I thought we had a solid marriage. But gifts, I said sweetly, can be revoked under certain circumstances. Adultery, for instance. I smiled at Amber, who was looking increasingly confused and slightly sick. Frank, what is she talking about? Amber's voice was small now. That's when I decided to drop the first bomb. Oh, honey, didn't he tell you? Frank and I are still married. The color drained from Amber's face so fast I thought she might faint. Still married? Very married, I confirmed cheerfully. You see, Frank told everyone you two got married in Italy. But what he didn't mention is that you can't actually get married when you're already married to someone else. That's called bigamy, and it's illegal in most civilized countries, Frank. Amber's voice was barely a whisper. Frank, tell her she's lying. Frank opened and closed his mouth like a fish gasping for air. Sophie had stopped recording and was staring at her father in horror. Even Jake, who could usually sleep through a tornado, looked suddenly alert. We were going to. The paperwork got complicated. Frank stammered, stumbling over his words like a drunk man trying to walk a straight line. What paperwork? I asked innocently. The divorce paperwork I never signed? The paperwork your lawyer never sent me? Or maybe you mean the marriage license that doesn't exist because you're already married to me? This was the part I'd been waiting for, months of patience, finally paying off. You see, Frank had spent so much energy planning his romantic Italian getaway that he'd forgotten about tiny details like actually filing for divorce. He'd assumed I'd just quietly disappear, sign whatever papers he eventually got around to sending me, and let him live his best life. Men Like Frank always assumed women like me will just roll over and play dead. We're supposed to be grateful for 28 years of marriage to someone who thinks Hooters is fine dining and considers scratching himself in public a form of self-expression. So you two had a commitment ceremony, I continued, enjoying the way Frank was sweating. Very sweet. Totally meaningless legally, but sweet. You, Amber finally found her voice shrill enough to wake the neighbors. You ruined everything. We had plans. We were going to be happy. Were you now? I tilted my head, smiling sympathetically. And those plans included living in my house, spending my money, and playing stepmom to my children while I conveniently disappeared? How thoughtful of you to plan my life for me, Mom. This is seriously messed up, Sophie said, looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You can't just destroy people's lives because you're mad, can't I? I asked quietly. Your father destroyed my life when he decided marriage was something he could just walk away from whenever he got bored. He took our children, our friends, our social circle, and tried to take our home. The only thing he didn't take was my brain. Jake was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to find somewhere else to live. The trust fund baby was about to discover that trust funds don't last forever. When you don't actually work, where are we supposed to go? Frank demanded. I have rights. I have belongings in that house. Had, I corrected. Past tense. And actually, your belongings are in a storage unit across town, Unit 247. The rent's paid through the end of the month. I handed him a small key. After that, you're on your own. A storage unit? Frank stared at the key like it was a dead mouse. You put my stuff in storage? I kept what mattered to me and donated the rest to charity. Amazing how little actually mattered when I really thought about it. That was true. 28 years of accumulated junk. And the only things I'd kept were the family photos and my grandmother's china. Everything else had just been taking up space. Frank stood there holding the storage key, looking lost and confused. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him, almost. Then Amber opened her mouth again. This isn't over, you crazy old bat. And that's when I smiled my biggest smile of the day. Because Amber had just made her first serious mistake. She'd threatened me in front of witnesses while I was recording. My lawyer was going to have an absolute field day with this, but more importantly, she'd just given me the perfect excuse to move on to phase 2 of my plan. Old bat, I repeated, pulling out my phone and making sure it was still recording. That's interesting. Tell me, Amber, how old do you think I am? Old enough to be completely desperate and pathetic, Amber snapped. She was really getting wound up now, her perfect little face twisted with rage. No wonder Frank left you. You're bitter and cruel, and 52, I interrupted calmly. I'm 52 years old. Frank is 55. That makes me 3 years younger than your boyfriend. But I suppose when you're 24, everyone over 30 looks ancient. Age is just a number. Amber shot back, but her voice lacked conviction. You're absolutely right, I agreed sweetly. Just like bankruptcy is just a word. Frank's head snapped up. What's that supposed to mean? Oh, did I not mention? I checked my watch, pretending I was running late for an appointment. Frank, honey, you remember that business loan you co-signed last year? The one for Jake's brilliant cryptocurrency startup? Jake went very still. Mom, you wouldn't what? I asked. Call in the loan that's 3 months overdue? The one you personally guaranteed with your father's signature? I looked at Frank with mock concern. You did read the paperwork before you signed it, didn't you? Frank's face had gone from red to white to a sickly shade of green. Jake, you said that was just a formality. You said the business was guaranteed to succeed. It was. Jake protested. The market just shifted. Crypto is volatile. I can turn it around. I'm sure you can, I said sweetly. But the loan company doesn't seem to think so. They've been very patient, but patience has limits. As does my willingness to keep covering for family members who think I'm just an old bat. They can walk all over. Sophie was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying, I replied evenly, that I've been covering Jake's loan payments for 3 months hoping he'd figure out how to be responsible. But since he seems to think his mother is just a convenient ATM, I've decided to stop enabling his incompetence. You can't do that. Frank was panicking now. If that loan defaults, they'll come after my assets. My credit will be ruined. What assets? I asked innocently. Your house is gone. Your savings account was frozen this morning pending the divorce proceedings. And your credit cards? Well, let's just say they're about to be very disappointed when they try to collect on those balances. This was the revelation I'd been saving for the perfect moment. Frank thought he'd been clever hiding assets, building up debt in accounts he assumed I didn't know about. But I'd known about everything, every secret credit card, every hidden expense, every dollar he'd spent on Amber's designer bags and weekend getaways. I'd just been waiting for the right time to use it. How did you? Frank started, then stopped. How did you know? About the secret accounts? About the money I've been spending? About the debts? I shrugged. Frank, I handled our finances for 28 years. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when you started acting like a teenager? With a stolen credit card? Amber was looking between us with growing alarm. Frank, what is she talking about? What money? What debts? It's nothing, baby, Frank said quickly. Just some misunderstandings, $43,000 in credit card debt. I announced cheerfully. All in Frank's name, of course. Amazing how quickly expenses add up when you're trying to impress a young woman. Jewelry, vacations. That adorable pink Jeep, Amber's head snapped toward him. You bought me that Jeep for my birthday. You said it was paid for. It is paid for, Frank insisted. I mean it will be. The payments are totally manageable. $647 a month, I added helpfully. Plus insurance for a 24-year-old driver in a high-risk vehicle category. That's another $300 a month, I added. Amber was doing the math in her head, and judging by her expression, the numbers weren't working out the way she'd hoped. Frank, she said slowly. You told me you were wealthy. You said money wasn't a problem. It's not a problem, Frank insisted. Patricia's just being vindictive. Once the divorce is final, I'll get half of everything. Half of what? I interrupted. Frank, sweetie, there is no everything to split. There's just debt, mountains of it, all in your name, and that's when I saw it. The exact moment Amber realized she'd quit her job, given up her apartment, and attached herself to a man who was not only still married but also completely broke. The exact moment she understood she'd traded her independence for a fantasy that was never going to come true. It was beautiful. Wait. Amber was waving her hands like she was trying to clear smoke. Frank, you told me you owned a successful company. You said you were planning to retire in 5 years. I do own a company, Frank protested, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Williams Construction has been profitable for 15 years. Williams Construction, I repeated, laughing out loud for the first time all day. Oh, honey, that's precious. Tell her about Williams Construction, Frank. Tell her who actually owns it. Frank's silence was answer enough. But I was enjoying myself too much to stop now, you see. Amber, Frank likes to tell people he owns a construction company. What he doesn't mention is that Williams Construction is owned entirely by me. Frank is an employee. A well-paid employee, I'll grant you, but still just an employee. That's impossible. Frank sputtered, is it? I asked sweetly. Should I call Tom Bradley and ask him who signs his paycheck? Tom's your foreman, isn't he, Frank? The one who's been running the actual operations for years while you've been out playing golf and pretending to be a business owner? Or maybe we should ask the IRS, since I've been filing the business taxes for 15 years. This was my favorite part of the whole plan. Frank had spent so many years taking credit for my work, my money, my decisions, that he'd actually started believing his own lies. He truly thought he owned the company, even though every legal document clearly listed me as the sole proprietor. But I built that company, Frank shouted. I worked 60 hours a week for years. You worked for me, I corrected calmly. And you were paid very well for your work. But owning a business? That requires paperwork, Frank, legal paperwork. The kind I handle because you hate boring stuff like contracts and tax forms. Sophie was recording again. But this time she looked more confused than excited. Mom, she said. Are you saying Dad doesn't actually own anything? That's exactly what I'm saying, I replied. Your father has been living off my money in my house, working for my company, and spending my credit for years. The only things he actually owns are his golf clubs. And that ridiculous Tommy Bahama shirt collection. She's lying. Frank turned desperately to Jake. Son, you know I'm successful. You've seen the company trucks, the job sites. I've seen Mom's company trucks, Jake said slowly. And I could practically see the pieces clicking into place in his head. Mom's the one who taught me about business licenses and tax law. Mom's the one who showed me how to read financial statements. Poor Jake. Not the brightest bulb in the chandelier, but at least he was starting to catch on. This is insane. Amber declared. I'm calling my mother. I'm going home. That might be a problem, Frank said quietly. What do you mean? You said you gave up your apartment, he reminded her, because you said we were getting married. Because you said we'd live in your beautiful house. Amber's voice was climbing toward a pitch that probably annoyed dogs 3 blocks away. We can figure this out, Frank said, though even he didn't sound convinced anymore. Figure what out? I asked pleasantly. Frank, you have no house, no money, no assets, and a mountain of debt. Amber has no job, no apartment, and apparently no legal relationship with you. Despite what she thought was a wedding. Jake has a failed business and a loan he can't pay back. Sophie has? Well, actually, Sophie has her influencer career. So she's probably fine, thanks, Mom, Sophie muttered. You're welcome. Sweetheart, I looked around the group. All of them staring at me like I was some kind of alien life form. This has been fun, I said. Checking my watch, but I have an appointment with my lawyer in an hour. We're finalizing the divorce papers and discussing the restraining order. Restraining order? Frank's voice cracked though. Yes, I said. You see, when you sent me that text telling me to be gone when you returned, and when you called me a nagging old bat in front of witnesses, and when your girlfriend here called me a crazy old bat and said, this isn't over, well, that constitutes harassment. Possibly even threatening behavior. Amber had gone very quiet. Smart girl. Unfortunately for her, it was too late for quiet. Margaret thinks we have an excellent case for a restraining order. That would prevent any of you from contacting me, coming within 500 feet of my new residence, or attempting to interfere with my business operations. Your new residence? Frank asked weakly. I smiled and pulled out my car keys. Did I not mention? I bought a lovely condo downtown. Cash purchase, of course. Gated community, excellent security, and absolutely no space for ungrateful children or cheating husbands. That's when I delivered the final blow of phase 2 and Frank. You might want to check your email. The divorce papers were filed this morning. Since you never responded to any of the previous notifications, and since you've been committing adultery for 3 years, this is going to be what's called an uncontested divorce. I get everything. You get nothing. And your girlfriend gets to learn what it's like to date a broke, homeless, middle-aged man with terrible credit. I climbed back into my Honda Civic and started the engine, rolling down the window one more time. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And remember, I work hard, too. So I deserve my new life. As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, standing on the empty lot like survivors of some natural disaster, trying to figure out what had just hit them, but I wasn't done with them yet. Phase 3 was going to be even better. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my new downtown condo, sipping wine on my balcony overlooking the city lights, when my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed Jake's number, and I actually debated whether to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello. Jake, Mom, we need to talk. His voice sounded different, tired, defeated. Maybe? Can I come over? I'm sorry, but that's not possible. There's a restraining order, remember? You'd have to stay 500 feet away from my building. Mom, please. I know we screwed up. I know Dad screwed up, but this is getting out of hand. I took another sip of wine. Through my floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city sparkling below me like a jewelry box. My new life was beautiful, quiet, and completely mine. What exactly is getting out of hand, Jake? Everything. Dad's sleeping in his car. Amber moved back in with her parents and won't take his calls. Sophie's pretending this whole thing never happened. But she's getting dragged on social media because someone posted video of the empty lot thing. How unfortunate. I didn't feel even a little bit sorry for any of them and the loan company. Jake continued, they're really aggressive. Mom, they're calling Dad at work, at your company, and they're threatening to garnish his wages. That's how debt collection works. Jake, you borrow money, you pay it back. If you don't pay it back, they make you pay it back. Simple concept, but he can't afford the payments, Jake said. Not with rent and car payments and everything else. This was the part I'd been waiting for, the part where they'd come crawling back, realizing exactly how much I'd been holding their lives together. Jake, let me ask you something. When your father was living in my house, eating food I bought, driving cars I paid for, and working at my company, how much did he contribute to household expenses? Silence on the other end of the line. I'll tell you how much, I said. 0. Frank hasn't paid for his own living expenses in over a decade. Everything he earned went toward his hobbies, his toys, his girlfriends. I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, the groceries, the maintenance. I subsidized his entire lifestyle while he told people he was a successful businessman. Mom, I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I replied. None of you wanted to know where the money came from as long as it kept coming. You just assumed I'd always be there, always paying the bills, always cleaning up your messes. That's not fair, Jake said, isn't it? Jake, you're 28 years old. You've never held a steady job, never paid rent, never even bought your own groceries. Your father is 55 and has never balanced a checkbook. Sophie makes money taking selfies but has never paid her own insurance. You're all financial children. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. What do you want us to do? He asked finally. I want you to grow up. I want you to learn what it feels like to work for something instead of having it handed to you. I want you to understand what I felt like for 28 years. Being taken for granted by people who were supposed to love me. Okay, I get it. We took advantage. We were ungrateful. But Mom, what's done is done. Can't we move forward? Can't we be a family again? We were never a family. Jake, we were a woman raising 3 grown men who treated her like hired help. That stung. I could tell. Good. Maybe it would motivate him to actually think about his life choices. So what now? You're just going to let Dad be homeless? Let me go bankrupt? Jake, I'm not letting anything happen. You're adults making adult choices and facing adult consequences. This is called real life, but you could help us. You have the money. The company's doing well, and there it was, the real reason for the call. They weren't sorry for how they'd treated me. They weren't interested in making amends or rebuilding our relationship. They just wanted me to fix their problems and write them another check. You're right. I said calmly. I do have money, and the company is doing very well. Tom Bradley is an excellent foreman, and without your father there to interfere with operations, we're actually more efficient than we've ever been. Wait, what do you mean without Dad there? Oh, that was interesting. Frank hadn't told them about losing his job yet. Your father was terminated 2 weeks ago. Excessive personal calls during work hours, using company resources for personal business, and a pattern of inappropriate behavior that was affecting morale. You fired Dad? I fired an employee who wasn't performing his duties. The fact that he used to be my husband is irrelevant to business operations. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then, Mom, you're destroying us. No, Jake, I'm letting you destroy yourselves. I'm just not cleaning up the mess anymore. This isn't the mother I know. You never knew me. I said sadly. You knew a woman who was too afraid of losing her family to stand up for herself. You knew someone who would rather be miserable than alone. That woman is gone, and she's never coming back. I hung up before he could respond. Outside my window, the city hummed with life and possibility. My wine was the perfect temperature. My condo was exactly the right amount of quiet. And I had absolutely no one to take care of except myself. It was the best feeling in the world. The next morning, I was reading the newspaper, an actual paper newspaper, because some pleasures are worth preserving, when my building's concierge called up to my unit. Mrs. Williams, there's a young woman in the lobby asking to see you. She says she's your daughter, Sophie. I'd been wondering when she'd make her appearance. Please tell her that I'm not available for visitors. But if she'd like to leave a message, I'll consider it. She says it's urgent, ma'am. Something about her father being in the hospital. My blood chilled for a moment, but then I remembered who I was dealing with. Sophie could make a hangnail sound like a medical emergency if it suited her purposes. Please ask her for details about which hospital and the nature of the emergency. A few minutes later, the concierge called back. She says he's at General Hospital, ma'am. Something about chest pains and stress. She seems quite upset. Despite everything, Frank was still the father of my children. And despite my anger, I wasn't a monster. If he was genuinely ill, that was different from being homeless and broke. Tell her I'll meet her in the lobby coffee shop in 10 minutes. I dressed carefully, not too formal, but certainly not like someone who was concerned or rushing. If this was a manipulation tactic, I wanted to make it clear I wasn't falling for it. Sophie was sitting at a corner table when I arrived, her phone face down for once. Her usual Instagram perfect makeup smudged with tears that looked genuine. Mom. She stood up the moment she saw me. And for a split second, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Sophie, I said quietly. Tell me about your father. She sank back into her chair, shoulders slumped. He collapsed at work yesterday. Well, at Tom's work site, I guess. Tom called the ambulance. What did the doctors say? Stress-induced heart palpitations, high blood pressure. They want to keep him for observation, but... She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. But what, Sophie? He doesn't have insurance anymore, not since you fired him. He can't afford the hospital bills, and there it was, the real reason for this meeting. Sophie, I said evenly. Your father had insurance through Williams Construction for 15 years because I provided it. When he became unemployed, he became eligible for COBRA coverage, which would have allowed him to keep that insurance for up to 18 months. What's COBRA? I just stared at her, my 26-year-old daughter. A woman who made more money than most people with real jobs. And she didn't even know what COBRA was. COBRA, I explained, is a federal law that lets people continue their employer-provided health insurance after losing their job. Your father got all the paperwork. He chose not to pay the premiums. Sophie looked genuinely confused. Why wouldn't he pay for insurance? Because COBRA premiums are expensive, I said. And your father's been living in his car while spending what little money he has trying to win Amber back. Priorities. He's been trying to win Amber back? Sophie's voice rose. Mom, she won't even talk to him. She posted on Instagram about dodging a bullet and fake rich. Guys, she's already dating someone else. I almost felt sorry for Frank, almost getting dumped by someone who only dated You for your money had to sting especially. When you found out she'd replaced you in less than a month, that's unfortunate for your father, I said calmly. But it's not my problem, Mom, he's in the hospital. Because of choices he made that led to stress and health problems, I said. Those are called natural consequences. Sophie stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. You really don't care, do you? You just hate all of us now. I don't hate anyone, Sophie, I said gently. But I'm not responsible for fixing problems other adults created for themselves. But you're our mother, I was your mother. I spent 28 years being your mother, your father's mother, and Jake's mother. I'm retired from that job. You can't retire from being someone's mother, watch me, I said simply. Sophie leaned forward, desperate now. Okay, fine. What if I pay you back? What if we all pay you back for everything? We'll get jobs, real jobs, and we'll pay you back every penny Dad spent on Amber. Every loan you covered for Jake, everything. With what jobs, Sophie? I asked. You take pictures of yourself for a living. Jake's biggest accomplishment is losing other people's money in cryptocurrency. And your father just got fired from the only job he's had in 20 years. I can do other things. She said quickly. I have marketing skills. Social media is a real business. She wasn't entirely wrong about that. Sophie had built a real following. She was probably more business savvy than either of the men in her life. But that didn't change the real issue, Sophie, I said softly. This isn't about money. It's about respect. About being valued as a person, not treated like an ATM with feelings. We do value you. When? I asked. When did any of you ever ask how I was feeling? When did anyone consider my opinion before making big decisions? When did any of you treat me like I mattered for anything other than my checkbook? Sophie opened her mouth, then closed it again. She couldn't think of an example, and we both knew it. Your father texted me to be gone when he got back from his fake wedding. He said he hated old things and deserved a new life. And you helped plan that wedding, Sophie. You chose his happiness over your own mother's, I thought. She whispered, I thought you'd be fine. You're always fine. You always figure things out. I was fine, I said. I did figure it out. I figured out how to be happy without people who didn't want me around. Sophie started crying again, and this time, I suspected the tears were for herself, not her father. So that's it? She asked through tears. You're just going to let Dad die in the hospital and let Jake go bankrupt? And never speak to any of us again? Your father isn't dying, Sophie. He's having anxiety attacks because his reckless lifestyle finally caught up with him. And Jake isn't going bankrupt because of me, he's going bankrupt because he borrowed money for a stupid business plan and spent it on toys. Instead of building a business, I stood up to leave. But Sophie grabbed my wrist. Mom, please, I'm begging you. Help us one more time. I promise things will be different. I looked down at her hand on my wrist, then back at her face. Sophie, I said softly, you want to know what different looks like? I gently removed her hand. Different is when your father starts paying his own bills. Different is when Jake gets a job that doesn't involve asking other people for money. Different is when you call me just to talk, not because you need something. Her voice cracked. But what if we did those things? Would you forgive us? Forgiveness and trust are different things, sweetheart, I said. And trust has to be earned. I walked away, leaving her there in the coffee shop with her tears, her phone, and the sudden realization that actions have consequences, even when you're young, pretty, and used to getting your way. But as I rode the elevator back up to my condo, I couldn't shake the image of Frank in a hospital bed alone, scared. Because despite everything, some part of me still remembered the man I'd fallen in love with 30 years ago. That was the part I had to be careful with, the part that was still vulnerable to manipulation. The part that still wanted to save people who didn't want to save themselves. That part could ruin everything. 2 days later, Margaret Chen called me with news that changed everything. Patricia, we need to meet immediately. She said, something's come up in the divorce proceedings that you need to know about. An hour later, I was sitting in her office, watching her spread documents across her desk with the efficiency of a Vegas card dealer. Frank's been busy, she said without preamble. Busier than we thought. What do you mean? I asked. Margaret handed me a thick folder. He filed a counter petition for the divorce. Claims you've been hiding assets, manipulating finances, and that the demolition of the house was destruction of marital property. He's asking for half of everything, including the business. I laughed out loud. He has no case. The house was legally mine. The business is legally mine. And I have documentation for every financial transaction. That's what I thought too. Margaret said. Until this, she pulled out another document, this one with an official seal. Frank hired an investigator. A good one. My blood ran cold. What kind of investigator? The kind that found out about the trust. The trust? I repeated slowly. I'd forgotten about the trust. Patricia, Margaret said. Why didn't you tell me about the Williams family trust established in 1998? The one that technically owns 40% of your business assets? My hands were shaking as I reached for the document. There it was in black and white, the trust I'd set up 25 years ago when Jake was born. It was meant to protect our family's assets and provide tax advantages. The trust that named Frank as co-trustee, I'd forgotten, I whispered. We never used it. It was just sitting there inactive. It's not inactive anymore, Margaret said grimly. Frank filed papers yesterday claiming his rights as co-trustee to access trust assets. If a judge agrees that the trust is legitimate and that Frank has rights to those assets, he could take 40% of your business. He could take 40% of everything that was purchased or improved using business profits. Over the past 25 years, your condo, your savings, your retirement accounts. I felt like I was falling into a deep, endless hole. Can he do that legally? I asked. That's what we're going to find out, she said. His lawyer is good, Patricia. Better than I expected. This isn't the simple divorce I thought we were handling. I spent the rest of the day in Margaret's office going through every document, every contract, every financial record. By evening, the picture was clear and terrifying. Frank might actually win. If the trust was valid, and it looked like it was, and if his rights as co-trustee were upheld, which they might be, then everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, everything I thought was safely mine could be split right down the middle. There has to be something, I said for the 10th time. Some loophole, some technicality, Patricia, Margaret said quietly. I've been doing this for 40 years. Sometimes bad people win. Sometimes good people lose. Sometimes the law doesn't care about justice. That night, I sat in my beautiful condo, looking out at my beautiful view, and realized I might lose it all. Frank sleeping in his car, having panic attacks, might end up with half of everything I'd worked for. The irony was spectacular. In trying to punish him for taking me for granted, I'd reminded him I was worth taking seriously. In trying to show him how much he needed me, I'd shown him exactly how much I was worth. My phone rang. Frank's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Patricia. His voice sounded different, stronger, more confident than it had in weeks. What do you want? Frank. I want to make a deal. What kind of deal? I dropped the trust claim. You drop the restraining order and the divorce proceedings. We go back to being married and pretend none of this ever happened. Absolutely not. Think about it, Patricia. You give me another chance and I give you back your money. I stay with you and you stay rich. Win-win. Frank, you cheated on me. You humiliated me. You tried to steal my house and my business. You told me I was old and worthless. I made mistakes. I was going through a midlife crisis. It happens to everyone. It doesn't happen to everyone, I said quietly. It happens to selfish people who think their feelings matter more than other people's lives. Patricia, be practical. If this goes to court, you could lose millions. Is your pride really worth that much? That's when I realized something that changed everything. Frank wasn't calling from a position of weakness. He was calling from a position of strength because he thought he held all the cards. He thought I'd be so terrified of losing my money that I'd take him back just to keep it. He thought I was still the same frightened woman who'd rather be miserable than alone. He thought wrong. Frank, I said calmly, let me ask you something. How much do you think I'm worth? What do you mean? My net worth. How much do you think I have? I don't know. A few million maybe? Try again. Silence on the other end of the line. Frank, you lived with me for 28 years. But you never paid attention to anything I actually did. You never looked at the real financial statements, never asked about the investments, never wondered why I worked such long hours or why I was always on the phone with lawyers and accountants. Patricia, what are you saying? I'm saying you have no idea what you're really fighting for. And you're about to find out why that's a problem. I hung up the phone and called Margaret. Margaret, I said, it's time for phase 4. Get ready to show Frank exactly what he's been taking for granted all these years. Phase 4, the one where he discovers that the trust is the least of his worries because Frank had just made his final mistake. He'd threatened to take what was mine, assuming I'd be too scared to fight back. He was about to learn the difference between someone who's afraid of losing everything and someone who's ready to burn it all down just to watch him cry. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Friday at 9 a.m. Frank arrived in his only remaining suit, the navy blue one. I'd bought him for our anniversary 3 years ago. He looked confident, almost smug, like a man certain he was about to win the lottery. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Margaret and I took our seats across from Frank and his lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named David Parker, who'd built his reputation on complex financial cases. Parker had clearly done his homework. I could see the thick folder of documents he'd prepared. Your Honor, Parker began when the judge called our case. My client is seeking his rightful share of marital assets that his wife has attempted to hide through illegal property transfers, and financial manipulation. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s named Judge Harrison, looked over her reading glasses at the paperwork. This concerns a trust established in 1998? Yes, Your Honor. The Williams Family Trust, which my client co-established with his wife, and which gives him equal rights to trust assets valued at approximately $4 million. Frank was practically glowing. $4 million was more money than he'd ever imagined having access to. Judge Harrison turned to Margaret. Counselor, how does your client respond to these claims? Margaret stood slowly, and I caught the faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Your Honor, she said. Mrs. Williams does not dispute the existence of the trust, however. She would like to present evidence regarding the full scope of marital assets that Mr. Williams is claiming. Proceed. Judge Harrison said. Margaret opened her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Your Honor, Mr. Williams has based his claim on the assumption that the Williams Family Trust represents the majority of his wife's assets. However, he has been operating with incomplete information. She handed copies of the document to the judge, to Parker, and to Frank. Frank's face went white as he read it. Your Honor, Margaret continued, Mrs. Williams' total net worth is not $4 million, as Mr. Williams believed. According to the certified financial statement prepared by the accounting firm of Bradley, Thompson and Associates, Mrs. Williams' current net worth is approximately $47 million. The courtroom went silent. Frank's mouth hung open like a broken gate. The Williams Family Trust represents less than 10% of Mrs. Williams' total assets. The majority of her wealth comes from real estate investments, stock portfolios, and business ventures that were purchased and developed using her inheritance money, not marital assets. Judge Harrison raised her eyebrows as she scanned this statement. Mrs. Williams, is this accurate? I stood up. Yes, Your Honor. My husband lived with me for 28 years, but he never took an interest in our finances beyond spending money. He has no idea what I've been building during our marriage. Margaret stepped forward. Furthermore, Mrs. Williams would like to present evidence that Mr. G. Williams has been systematically stealing from marital accounts to fund an extramarital affair. She handed over another thick folder. Credit card statements, bank records, receipts. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Williams has spent approximately $127,000 of marital funds on gifts, travel, and expenses related to his relationship with Ms. Amber Collins. This represents embezzlement of marital assets, Frank's lawyer whispered frantically. But Frank looked like he was about to be sick. Your Honor, Margaret said, delivering the final blow. Mrs. Williams is prepared to offer Mr. Williams a settlement. What kind of settlement? Judge Harrison asked. Mr. Williams may keep his personal belongings, his car, and receive a one-time payment of $50, in exchange for relinquishing all claims to marital property, business assets, and trust funds. In addition, he will be required to repay the $127,000 he embezzled, either in cash or through wage garnishment over a period not to exceed 10 years. Frank was shaking. Patricia, you can't be serious. I looked at him directly for the first time that day. Frank, you wanted a new life. This is your new life. You can accept the settlement and walk away with $50,000, which is more than you deserve, or you can fight it and walk away with nothing except a criminal charge for embezzlement. Embezzlement? Frank's voice cracked. You can't prove that. Margaret handed the judge another document. Actually, Your Honor, we can. Mr. Williams used marital credit cards to purchase gifts for his mistress, charged vacation expenses to joint accounts, and withdrew cash from business accounts for personal use. All of this is documented. Judge Harrison had seen enough. Mr. Williams, I suggest you consider the settlement very carefully, based on the evidence presented. Your wife has grounds for criminal charges that would leave you with far less than $50,000. Frank looked at his lawyer desperately, but Parker shook his head. Your Honor, Frank said quietly, I'd like to request a recess to consider the settlement. You have 15 minutes, in the hallway. Frank approached me, tears in his eyes. Patricia, I had no idea about the money, about how much you'd built. You never meant to get caught. I corrected Frank. You spent our entire marriage treating me like hired help while I was building an empire. You thought I was just some dependent housewife you could discard when you got bored. I was stupid. I was selfish. Can't we work this out? Can't we try again? I looked at the man I had once loved, the man who had shared my bed for 28 years, and felt absolutely nothing. Frank, take the settlement. Use the $50,000 to start over. Get a job. Find an apartment. Learn how to be responsible for yourself. Maybe someday you'll understand what you threw away, and if I don't take the settlement, then I'll file criminal charges and you'll spend the next few years in prison for embezzlement. Your choice. 10 minutes later, Frank signed the papers. As I walked out of the courthouse, Margaret shook my hand. That was the most satisfying case I've handled in years. How does it feel to be free? I looked up at the afternoon sky, breathed in the cool autumn air, and smiled. It feels like winning. 6 months later, I was sitting on the beach behind my new house, not a condo this time, but an actual house with a yard, a garden, and plenty of space for the life I was building. My phone rang. It was Sophie. Mom, I got a job. A real job. Marketing coordinator for a local business. I wanted you to know. That's wonderful, Sophie. How do you like it? I asked. It's hard. Harder than I expected, but I'm learning things about business. About responsibility. About what it means to earn something instead of just having it handed to you. I'm proud of you. I said, Mom, could we maybe have coffee sometime? I'd like to tell you about the job. And maybe I'd like to get to know you. The real you, not just the mom who fixed everything for us. I looked out at the ocean, watching the waves roll in endlessly, carrying away the old and bringing in the new. I'd like that very much, really, really. But Sophie, we go Dutch on the coffee. She laughed, hand for the first time in years. It sounded genuine. Deal, Mom, fair is fair. As I hung up, I realized this was what victory really looked like. Not revenge, not punishment, but the simple satisfaction of being valued for who I was instead of what I could provide. I was 52 years old, worth $47 million, and finally completely free. And the best part? I was just getting started. Music. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.